Hey, David.
Hey, you're in space. Nice.
Yes.
Got some nebulas behind you.
Yes.
Or a nebula.
Yeah, I'm never quite sure what these things are. This is my Unsplash.
You're playing with the Zoom's green screen, back screen.
Oh yeah, my son turned us all invisible for the morning chapel. That was exciting. Hello, Don.
Good morning, Ernie. How are you?
Pretty good.
Great.
It's very touched to have both you and David here because you've both been so faithful through so many things. David, you have much less hair.
Yeah, that was not intentional. Saying that there's
be back in a second.
Yeah, like cutting places, I don't know if they're really open or not. We had a friend who she cuts hair. She also takes my dad to dialysis and sits with him there several times a week. She was supposed to use scissors and somehow she just ended up using the razor.
Oh dear.
We just purchased a razor for home use because everything here is closed. So it'll be interesting to see what we all look like on Monday. Most people I know have more hair now because they're either growing it out. Lots of people have beards from home context. Hello, Leonard. Leonard's still typing. He's almost there.
Hello, David. My name's John McClements. I don't think we've been introduced, but
yeah.
please.
Hello, John.
Yeah, John's part of Kingsway. David's visited us a couple of times, especially when you lived up in Santa Rosa. Oh. David's worked with me in the Swan Factory and various other ventures over the last several years.
Great.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you.
John is my right arm intercessor. We've walked through many dark valleys.
Indeed.
Leonard, are you there? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. I can see you. I'm trying to figure out why you can't see me, but
yeah.
Are you sharing your video?
He's been trying to share his video, but like a black screen for some reason.
This is. But you guys can go ahead. I'll work on this here.
All right. Let me give one more minute to see if Ted is going to show. My cousin from India was also going to try and join us, which would be exciting. So yes, I'll repeat this when people come. So this is, as I said, this is not a lecture. This is a lab. And hey.
Morning, Ted.
Good morning. I love that background, bro.
Thank you.
Oh, man.
All right. We will go ahead and get started because we have 30 minutes on the clock and 35 minutes left on the Zoom timer. So it'll keep us honest. I am recording this. So the first rule of the Great Reset is that everything is recorded. Everything is live. So be mindful of what you say, but I came up with this idea a week ago, having no idea what I would actually do. I have built a career around figuring out what the right thing to do is, and only later worrying about whether it was possible.
Love it.
Hey, Dialan, thanks for joining us. So a couple of days ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was wrestling with what does God want for the body of Christ? And what was weird is that this question had occurred to me before, but I couldn't keep the question in my mind. I don't know if you've ever experienced this. Usually I have a question and I can't figure out the answer. But in this case, I couldn't even get a hold of the question. And so I was sitting there and praying and trying to figure out, like, what is it that God's trying to say? And I couldn't even keep the question firmly in my mind. So I've been taking this class by Doug Addison, teacher out of Los Angeles, and he really recommends taking communion all the time. So I went and I had communion, and I sat there and I did a little cup and a little piece of hot dog roll of all things. And suddenly everything became clear. As I took the bread and I took the cup, I realized, this is the thing that I'm missing that is almost impossible to think about, which is the cup of suffering. And so that's the discipleship exercise I want to walk you guys through today with me, and we will see what happens. So let me share my screen, or maybe my web browser if that works. So you can all see that.
Yes.
And I'll just do this in edit mode because we're doing this live. So the title, so I don't want to be a speaker. I don't want to be a preacher. The word we came up with when I was experimenting with this with some friends from the USC Center for Public Philosophy was domaganto, which is a word that means question tamer in the artificial language Esperanto. And the idea is that I do not have the answers. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but there is an important question that I want to tame so that we can, and the question really is, for me, what is the cup of suffering that Jesus was willing to drink from in the Garden of Gethsemane? And what does it mean for us? So I'm kind of breaking this down into two pieces. And because this is an online Zoom thing, the goal is that we're all going to just discuss this together, whoever is able to join us. Who's there on the bottom there? Tony, thank you for joining us.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, so we're all here live, recorded on the internet, going through a discipleship exercise with the question of the cup of suffering. So I'm starting with two assumptions that I want to hear your guys, whether you agree with me and are on board with this. One is I believe that nothing on earth is more important than becoming like Jesus, which includes loving like Jesus. There are other things that are equally important perhaps, and there are things in heaven which may be more important. But the way I look at things is that the ultimate measure is, am I becoming more like Jesus? So I'm just going to open it up and see if people have any thoughts on that. Feel free to take 30 seconds to think about it.
I have lots of thoughts on that. Love the way you framed this question. It is so right on, bro.
So
I've been living it.
You would agree with that assumption?
I agree with your assumption, and I also agree with the stuff you said before the assumption.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, reactions? +1, -1? You can put it in the chat if you don't feel like talking.
This is John. Yeah, this is John. I have a couple of responses to it. I think that that the way you framed this question really relates to our character. It may not completely relate to our relationship in the great scheme of things that God is working out. But I believe that in terms of character, yes, our goal is to become more like Jesus. And the goal of life and training in effect is to make us more like Jesus if we're willing.
Right. So let me stretch that a little bit. What about in terms of our behavior?
Well, may I respond?
In some sense, I'm not saying we should become slavishly like Jesus.
You go to the same.
We should wear robes or be single or die at age 30.
We get till 33.
Okay.
I've already flown past that point.
But I mean, yes, and I mean, it's right there. I mean, the same place that you talked about, same place in scriptures. It's John chapter 14, where he says, I'm going to leave. That's the context. You can't go where I'm going to go, but believe me, that I'm the Messiah. You can trust me. And then he says, if you can't believe my words, believe my works. pointing to his miracles.
Mhm.
And then he says to them, whoever believes in me will do what I have done and even greater works than these. I mean, you can't get any clearer than that he is challenging us, inviting us, promising us that we have the opportunity to produce the same fruit he did.
All right, so let's move on in the interest of time. Thank you. Anyone else can feel free to share your comments on the chat window if you don't want to speak up. The second assumption, this is a hard one, is that if we want to become like Jesus in his glory and his power and his character, we also have to become like him in his sufferings.
Well, in John 15, it says very clearly, it says Jesus is saying, no servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. So I don't think that I don't believe that it's possible to become more like Jesus without embracing the suffering that he suffered. And that, I believe, is individual. But there's also some collective measure of suffering that the whole church is going through right now, because collectively we don't reflect the character of Jesus very well.
Thank you, John. Anyone want to find any scripture other from the book of John?
I've had a big paradigm shift in this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, more of a clarity, probably a paradigm shift to clarity. Everybody suffers. You know, those who follow Jesus are suffering right now. Those who don't follow Jesus are suffering. The whole world's suffering right now. You know, before what my paradigm shift is, I get to fellowship with Jesus in my sufferings.
Mm-hmm.
Like what he was drinking in was to prepare himself to go to the cross for me. He was giving the power to that cup, you know, that blood. He was putting magic juice into that blood that I can take now. And I get to take it, and he transforms, you know, the joy set before him was his fellowship with us right now, to give us shalom in the midst of our mess. Like I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and I was bringing up, you know, you got to die to yourself unless you die to yourself. And he's like, you and your death, you're always talking about that. That's not the only thing the Bible talks about. And I reflected on that, and I go, bro, you and I look at death because I wake up, and when I'm not dead, I'm in this funk of anxiety and fear. And when I'm able to break through and die to myself and come alive to Jesus, like, oh, now I'm in peace, I'm in joy. Like, he's got this. Like, to me, it's like, wow, I get to die to my old self and live in peace and joy and trust him.
In my experience, death is awesome. Dying is a royal pain.
Oh yeah, it's always a pain, of course.
Yeah. All right, but yeah, and I think but yes, there is a place when you are dead to the world, dead to your expectations, dead to your own ego, which is this amazing bliss. But getting there is quite literally going through hell. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's what we see with Jesus.
What I'm trying to say is, at least I've already been going through hell. And you're going to go through hell whether you follow Jesus or not. So the option is not whether you go through hell or not. You know, everybody has a portion of suffering allotted unto them. The issue is, do you want Jesus to hold your hand and be your shepherd and lead you through the valley of the shadow of death, or do you want to do it on your own? Do you want to fight against it? If you try to save your life, you'll lose it. Or do you want to have him with you? That, to me, is the whole fellowship of with him in your sufferings. It's like, wow, he went before me. I get to follow him. I get to have him with me. That's what I'm trying to say of the paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys
You're
hear
gonna
me?
suffer whether you follow Jesus or not. This whole idea that, wow, my life was so simple until I became a Christian. Yeah, your life was so simple until a certain point in life. And it hits you, whether you're a Christian or not.
Yeah, I like
And I,
Tim Ferriss's way of describing it. He says, the more voluntary suffering we embrace, the less involuntary suffering we will face.
Tim
Right?
Ferriss is one of those very, very Christian pagans. He's got so much wisdom.
can I jump
Yep.
in on this? I don't know if you can
Please.
hear me.
Please.
All right, I got my video working. This is Leonard here. Hi.
Hey, Leonard.
The home
Hey,
in
Leonard.
Madison, Wisconsin. So my thoughts on that, I think I like what Ted was sharing about, we are all going to go through difficult times. And I think the perspective there that, and I'll try to summarize this somehow, would be, there is this discussion out there. I saw something posted with one of the Kardashians or something, saying here, this is suffering is from God to teach you something. And, there is a part of the body of Christ that believes that part, that, suffering originates with God, and that's part of his purpose, and it's for his glory and everything like that, which I think conflicts with understanding the love of God. So if we want to, as Ted say, invite Jesus along the path through the sufferings and the difficult life that all of us have, and my life is a lot more easier than most people's, I have to say. But still, if I'm going to invite Jesus in, I really have to have a pretty high confidence level about his love. That the things that he leads me through. So I don't know. There's a conflict there in my mind, and I see a lot of people that sort of have to deal with that.
So yeah,
that's my thought
here, because actually, I have a hard time. My brain is wired very strangely. What exactly is the conflict? Because I keep going back to, because from my perspective, my transformational moment was when I was doing the startup with David and a friend of ours named Daniel. We did a devotional on Hebrews 12 right when the startup was about to implode and we were all sick and running out of money. And Hebrews 12:6, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son.
Right.
So for me,
I think the difference there in my mind. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. So.
No. It's just like I'm in this weird scenario with my kids and myself. It's like, when I'm paying more attention to my kids, their life is harder. I'm making my kids get up at 7 o'clock and do calisthenics and chapel every day, and they don't always feel it. They're actually been really good sports and actually embracing it. But it's actually a lot more painful when I'm actually fathering them actively, when I'm letting them do their own thing. Let me just share this. I don't want to talk too much, but that I had a moment when I was taking this class called Hunger School in Fusion, it's called now. When I was reading about Robert Frost's book, about the Father's Heart of God, and I realized the world has a picture of weak fathering and abusive fathering. And when they actually see loving fathering, it either looks weak or abusive, because we don't actually know what a loving father looks like. Anyway, let's go with it on the questions, because this is what I want to.
Wait.
Okay.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Leonard? Or
No, I understand that part, and I think for me, I think you got to differentiate between, I don't know the right words here, but then sort of like the standard normal sufferings of life that happens, Or, for example, let's say, think of the worst thing that can, I don't know, if I have a daughter, I have son, you know, what's the worst thing that can happen? Really is some kind of evil.
Evil
know?
tragedy.
Yeah, not just tragedy, but the kind of evil that no father, doesn't matter what country, what religion, what background they have, that sort of universal evil that no one would even consider a loving father would allow to happen to their kids, for example. Okay.
So let's actually, this is a good segue. This is a great segue.
Yeah.
So that's the conflict. I'm not talking, for example,
I
have a friend of mine.
hear you. And I think that's a great segue to this verse that is the heart of what I'm wrestling with, is the conversation Jesus had with his father. And I literally am speechless at this verse.
Can you read it again?
Sure. Matthew 26:39. My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will.
I just feel God's presence so strongly when you read that. I mean, that's like everything. That's like who Jesus is to me.
Mm-hmm.
There was no other way. I mean, you just brought up the universal question, but they decided together, and it's going to be really, really hard. And let's think of the most horrific thing that can happen, or not think of it. This is what you have to do for us to balance the scales.
Yeah.
And I don't see it as a paradigm. I mean, we only understand that as the paradigm from God's righteousness and justice. And that's just one metaphor to understand what really happened, which is a mystery that we can never fully understand. Another one is a hostage situation. Another one is a champion, a warrior who goes in and wins a battle to win back the right. That's what needed to happen. And, Jesus went to the limits. He couldn't do it on his own, but he still did it. And the sacrifice of the Father, to let his son do that. And why did he do that? For the joy set before us, to look us in the eyes, to say, I've been there, done that, and you can trust me. I'm not going to take you out of this world. I never promised, but I will be with you, and you will overcome it. And you're never going to have to go through what I went through. And on top of that, I will be with you when you go through what you're going to go through. I love him. I worship him.
Yes.
And I'll just be vulnerable here. I mean, John and I prayed during the California drought that we asked for God to heal California, and we committed our lives and our families to the cause of God. And I don't know if we imagined what that cost might be. And it feels wrong from our American sensibilities that the choices of the parents get inflicted on the children. But that's the way it's always been. Abraham chose to follow God.
Yes.
And his children were enslaved, persecuted, gassed, and everything. But he still has children 4,000 years later, including us. And I don't know the cost of this. I don't know where this will lead. But I know it will have consequences. And it will have consequences for my family. If I fail, it has one consequence of consequences. If it succeeds, it has perhaps even worse consequences. And I have to say, okay, is this what a loving father would do? And I honestly don't know intellectually how to answer that, but I kind of end up back at the same place Jesus was. I can only do what I see the Father doing. And the way I see the Father treating Jesus is frankly terrifying. But when I think about how Jesus has treated me, and I've been, as I like to say, I've been to hell and back so many times, I have frequent friar miles. But at the end of it, I have to look back and say, I know God better than I did. I know myself better than I did. And I am more like the person I always wanted to be, and I often thought I was. And the only way I can ever see that happening on this earth is by being willing to take the cup of suffering, not as a punishment, not as a way to abase myself, the way that Danny Silva calls the punishment paradigm, but as a way to learn obedience and bring healing to the world. So in the last 5 minutes, talk about whatever you want, but what I want to focus on is the joy that makes the suffering worth it. Like when we do physical exercise, the personal trainer is always yelling, it feels horrible now, you may hate me, but think of what you're going to get in exchange.
Right.
And, one of the things I am so grateful for, you remember first love, when you loved it when the girl, I guess it's all guys here, had a problem that required you to extend yourself to meet, carrying books, comforting her in sorrow, buying something expensive. And it was so great when the need was great, because then the love was demonstrated by what you were willing to go through for her. And to have that first love say, God, I am grateful that this hurts, that this is not easy. The great boxer, Muhammad Ali, was asked his secret. And my son was telling me, he said, I only start counting reps when it hurts. And I often think worship only really counts when it hurts. I mean, I love worshiping, but sometimes it hurts to worship. And I kind of think that's what blesses God the most. And that's what unlocks redemption in the lives of the people I care about. And that's why I am proud and hoping to be a spectacle, to share my weaknesses, my struggles, my fears, my failures. The only thing I have to give to God is my lack of him. That is the one thing he does not have, that mysteriously he wants. And that's what I'm trying to do with this great reset. I'm not coming with wisdom or theories or answers. I have lots of that somewhere, and occasionally it's useful. If we're going to break these strongholds, if we're going to turn things right side up again, if we're really going to become like Jesus, we have to bring our brokenness. We have to be like him, naked on a cross for the world to see. At least that's how I see it. In the last 3 minutes, any closing thoughts from the rest of you?
I loved it. What do we need? It boils down to just surrender, transparency, admitting we don't have the answers. That's how we can represent him best.
John, my cousin, you were sharing some similar thoughts that you've been wrestling with in India.
Right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, yeah. Oh, from India. Oh,
Hello.
yeah. We have Tony also here with me. Just since we're almost out of time, very briefly, I think, I was very much intrigued, in hearing you guys share on different stuff. And personally, it was edifying. I think suffering, as we are talking about, I think there's two kinds of suffering, like one which the world suffers, and the other is like when you follow Christ, there is a cross that each of us must carry. And I think for each of us, the cross might look different, but the question would be is like, am I willing to carry it to the fullest extent, and am I willing to? So one of the things very briefly is during this time of uncertainty and a lot of things going on, personally, the way I examined my life was how I built my life thus far. Has Jesus really been the Lord of my life? And have I built things based on what he wanted? Could be different things, my work, my children, everything. Have I built my life based on him being Lord of my life, based on his counsel and based on what he wants from me? And it was a good time of reflection and rededication, actually personally, to make some changes and also continue building my life, ministry, and everything with Jesus as Lord. I think at the end of the day, it is like what God wants from each of us, and are we ready to do what he wants from us, regardless of the cost?
All right. All right, we need to wrap up now. Zoom, bless their hearts, they saw us hitting the limit and let us go a little longer, which is very kind. I think I'm encouraged enough to go invest in a full-time license, but I'm just so grateful to all of you for showing up.
I have Ernie, I have a full-time license. You can borrow it if you'd like.
Yeah, all right.
I'm not logged in on it. If I was.
Yeah, that's fine. But I really appreciate Leonard sharing his questions, because for me, that's the most important thing, is that we bring the hard questions and different opinions. Like, I may not be thinking about this correctly, or I may have the basic idea right, but I'm not communicating it well, or I'm not understanding some details. And we've got to hash this out. I don't want to be, my terror, which I don't think I have much to worry about, but still, is that people will take me too seriously. That they just start accepting what I say. And like, it's gotta be hard, it's gotta be awkward, it's difficult, because that's what it was with Jesus. We gotta wrestle with these things, and we gotta let people know it's okay, because that's how we take ownership of it. That's how we become the church decentralized. We don't rely on somebody with the answers at the top. We own it ourselves, and we wrestle it in the dark places of our soul. David, I hate to call you out, man, but you've been so faithful. Would you take the step and close us in prayer?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, dear Lord, thank you for this time to reflect on you, your suffering, to talk about these assumptions and these questions, and to discuss these things, Lord. I know that, Lord, I have a really hard time wanting to head this route, wanting to, or choosing to die to myself, to suffer, to give up what I think should be, to not dictate to you what I want or what I think should be, especially being jobless, Lord. Dictating to you about needing a job and needing you to give me one ASAP, and to just trust you and all that. Lord, I just pray for all of us here, Lord, various places that we live in, Lord, that you help us to follow you, to take these things to heart. Help me, Lord, in my weakness to trust you, and my failure to trust you, my failure to humble myself and to follow you even through joblessness and through hard times, Lord, through this pandemic that we're facing and wondering where that's going to lead. And Lord, I just pray that I know I can be really selfish. I just pray that you help us to all serve those around us through this time. I ask this, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, David, thank you all so much. Thank you for the time. Ted and I, you and I need to talk about how we're going to post all this stuff, but one step at a time.
If you can give me the copy, I can post it. I can upload it and post it.
All right, I'll put it in the base camp.
The recording.
There. Let me know if you need anything else. God bless you all.
Okay.
All right.
Bless you all.
Thanks, Ernie.
God bless you. Thank you all for coming. God bless you, David.
Yeah, thank you.